Chapter 17 of the Circular Staircase. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ana Sofia Simão de Portugal. The Circular Staircase by Mary Roberts Rinehart. Chapter 17. A Hint of Scandal. In giving the gist of what happened at the inquest, I have only one excuse: to recall to the reader the events of the night of Arnold Armstrong's murder. Many things had occurred which were not brought out at the inquest, and some things were told there that were new to me. Altogether, it was a gloomy affair, and 6 men in the coroner, who constituted the coroner jury, were evidently the merest puppets in the hands of that all-powerful gentleman, the coroner. Gertrude and I sat well back, with our veils down. There were a number of people I knew. Barbara Fitzhugh, in extravagant mourning. She always went into black on the slightest provocation, because it was becoming. And Mr. Jarvis, the man who had come over from the Greenwood Club the night of the murder. Mr. Harden was there too, looking impatient as the inquest dragged, but alive to every particle of evidence. From a corner, Mr. Jameson was watching the proceedings intently. Dr. Stewart was called first. His evidence was told briefly, and amounted to this. On the Sunday morning previous, at 5:15, he had been called to the telephone. The message was from a Mr. Jarvis, who asked him to come at once to Sunnyside, as there had been an accident there, and Mr. Arnold Armstrong had been shot. He had dressed hastily, gathered up some instruments, and driven to Sunnyside. He was met by Mr. Jarvis, who took him at once to the east wing. There, just as he had fallen, was the body of Arnold Armstrong. There was no need of the instruments. The man was dead. In answer to the coroner's question, no, the body had not been moved, save to turn it over. It lay at the foot of the circular staircase. Yes, he believed death had been instantaneous. The body was still somewhat warm, and rigor mortis had not set in. It occurred late in cases of sudden death. No, he believed the probability of suicide might be eliminated. The wound could have been self-inflicted, but with difficulty, and there had been no weapon found. The doctor's examination was over, but he hesitated and cleared his throat. "Mr. Coroner," he said, "at the risk of taking up valuable time, I would like to speak of an incident that may or may not throw some light on this matter." The audience was alert at once. "Kindly proceed, doctor," the coroner said. "My home is in Inglewood, 2 miles from Casanova," the doctor began. "In the absence of Dr. Walker, a number of Casanova people have been consulting me. A month ago, 5 weeks to be exact, a woman whom I had never seen came to my office. She was in deep mourning and kept her veil down, and she brought for examination a child, a boy of 6. The little fellow was ill. It looked like typhoid, and the mother was frantic. She wanted a permit to admit the youngster to Children's Hospital in town here, where I am a member of the staff, and I gave her one. The incident would have escaped me but for a curious thing. 2 days before Mr. Armstrong was shot, I was sent for to go to the country club. Someone had been struck with a golf ball that had gone wild. It was late when I left. I was on foot, and about a mile from the club, on the Claysburg Road, I met 2 people. They were disputing violently, and I had no difficulty in recognizing Mr. Armstrong. The woman, beyond doubt, was the one who had consulted me about the child." At this hint of scandal, Mrs. Ogden Fitzhugh sat up very straight. Jameson was looking slightly skeptical, and the coroner made a note. "The Children's Hospital, you say, doctor?" "Yes, but the child, who was entered as Lucien Wallace, was taken away by his mother 2 weeks ago. I have tried to trace them and failed." All at once I remembered a telegram sent to Louise by someone signed F.L.W., presumably Dr. Walker. Could this veiled woman be the Nina Carrington of the message? But it was only idle speculation. I had no way of finding out, and inquest was proceeding. The report of the coroner's physician came next. The post-mortem examination showed that the bullet had entered the chest in the fourth left intercostal space and had taken an oblique course downward and backward, piercing both the heart and lungs. The left lung was collapsed, and the exit point of the ball had been found in the muscles of the back to the left of the spinal column. It was improbable that such a wound would have been self-inflicted, and its oblique downward course pointed to the fact that the shot had been fired from above. In other words, as the murdered man had been found dead at the foot of a staircase, it was probable that the shot had been fired by someone higher up on the stairs. There were no marks of powder. The bullet, a .38 caliber, had been found in the dead man's clothing, and was shown to the jury. Mr. Jarvis was called next, but his testimony amounted to little. He had been summoned by telephone to Sunnyside, had come over at once with Stewart and Mr. Winthrop, at present out of town. They had been admitted by the housekeeper, and had found the body lying at the foot of the staircase. He had made a search for a weapon, but there was none around. The outer entry door in the east wing had been unfastened and was open about an inch. I had been growing more and more nervous. When the coroner called Mr. John Bailey, the room was filled with suppressed excitement. Mr. Jameson went forward and spoke a few words to the coroner, who nodded. Then Elsie was called. "Mr. Innes," the coroner said, "will you tell under what circumstances you saw Mr. Arnold Armstrong the night he died?" "I saw him first at the country club," Elsie said quietly. He was rather pale, but very composed. "I stopped there with my automobile for gasoline. Mr. Armstrong had been playing cards. When I saw him there, he was coming out of the card room talking to Mr. John Bailey." "The nature of the discussion, was it amiable?" Elsie hesitated. "They were having a dispute," he said. "I asked Mr. Bailey to leave the club with me and come to Sunnyside over Sunday." "Isn't it a fact, Mr. Innes, that you took Mr. Bailey away from the clubhouse because you were afraid there would be blows?" "The situation was unpleasant," Elsie said evasively. "At that time, had you any suspicion that the Traders' Bank had been wrecked?" "No." "What occurred next?" "Mr. Bailey and I talked in the billiard room until 2:30. "And Mr. Arnold Armstrong came there while you were talking?" "Yes. He came about 2:30. It rapped at the east door, and I admitted him." The silence in the room was intense. Mr. Jameson's eyes never left Elsie's face. "Will you tell us the nature of his errand?" "He brought a telegram that had come to the club for Mr. Bailey." "He was sober?" "Perfectly at that time, not earlier." "Was not his apparent friendliness a change from his former attitude?" "Yes, I did not understand it." "How long did he stay?" "About 5 minutes. Then he left by the east entrance." "What occurred then?" "We talked for a few minutes, discussing a plan Mr. Bailey had in mind. Then I went to the stables where I kept my car and got it out." "Leaving Mr. Bailey alone in the billiard room?" Elsie hesitated. "My sister was there?" Mrs. Ogden Fitzhugh had the courage to turn and eye Gertrude through her longhorn. "And then?" "I took the car along the lower road, not to disturb the household. Mr. Bailey came down across the lawn, through the hedge, and got into the car on the road." "Then you know nothing of Mr. Armstrong's movements after he left the house?" "Nothing. I read of his death Monday evening for the first time." "Mr. Bailey did not see him on his way across the lawn?" "I think not. If he had seen him, he would have spoken of it." "Thank you. That is all. Miss Gertrude Innes." Gertrude's reply were fully as concise as Elsie's. Mrs. Fitzhugh subjected her to a close inspection, commencing with her hat and ending with her shoes. I flatter myself she found nothing wrong with either her gown or her manner, but poor Gertrude's testimony was the reverse of comforting. She had been summoned, she said, by her brother, after Mr. Armstrong had gone. She had waited in the billiard room with Mr. Bailey. until the automobile had been ready. Then she had locked the door at the foot of the staircase, and, taking a lamp, had accompanied Mr. Bailey to the main entrance of the house, and had watched him cross the lawn. Instead of going at once to her room, she had gone back to the billiard room for something which had been left there. The card room and billiard room were in darkness. She had groped around, found the article she was looking for, and was on the point of returning to her room, when she had heard someone fumbling at the lock at the east outer door. She had thought it was probably her brother, and had been about to go to the door when she heard it open. Almost immediately there was a shot, and she had run panic-stricken through the drawing-room and had roused the house. "You heard no other sound?" the coroner asked. "There was no one with Mr. Armstrong when he entered." "It was perfectly dark. There were no voices, and I heard nothing. There was just opening of the door, the shot, and sound of somebody falling." Then, while we went through the drawing-room and upstairs to alarm the household, the criminal, whoever he was, could have escaped by the east door. "Yes." "Thank you. That will do." I flatter myself that the coroner got little enough out of me. I saw Mr. Jameson smiling to himself, and the coroner gave me up after a time. I admitted I had found the body, said I had not known who it was until Mr. Jarvis told me, and ended by looking up at Barbara Fitzhugh and saying that in renting the house I had not expected to be involved in any family scandal, at which she turned purple. The verdict was that Arnold Armstrong had met his death at the hands of a person or persons unknown, and we all prepared to leave. Barbara Fitzhugh flounced it out without waiting to speak to me, but Mr. Arthur came up, as I knew he would. "You have decided to give up the house, I hope, Miss Innes," he said. "Mrs. Armstrong has wired me again." "I'm not going to give it up," I maintained, "until I understand some things that are puzzling me. The day that murder is discovered, I will leave." "Then, judging by what I have heard, you will be back in the city very soon," he said, and I knew that he suspected the discredited cashier of the Traders' Bank. Mr. Jameson came up to me as I was about to leave the coroner's office. "How is your patient?" he asked with his odd little smile. "I have no patient," I replied, startled. "I'll put it in a different way, then. How is Miss Armstrong?" She is doing very well," I stammered. "Good," cheerfully. "And our ghost, is it late?" "Mr. Jameson," I said suddenly, "I wish you'd do one thing. I wish you'd come to Sunnyside and spend a few days there. The ghost is not late. I want you to spend one night at least watching the circular staircase. The murder of Arnold Armstrong was a beginning, not an end." He looked serious. "Perhaps I can do it," he said. "I have been doing something else, but, well, I will come out tonight." We were very silent during the trip back to Sunnyside. I watched her truth closely and somewhat sadly. To me there was one glaring flaw in her story, and it seemed to stand out for everyone to see. Arnold Armstrong had had no key, and yet she said she had locked the east door. He must have been admitted from within the house. Over and over I repeated it to myself. That night, as gently as I could, I told Louise the story of her stepbrother's death. She sat in her big, pillow-filled chair and heard me through without interruption. It was clear that she was shocked beyond words. If I had hoped to learn anything from her expression, I had failed. She was as much in the dark as we were. End of chapter 17.